All right. So how do narcissists distract you from focusing on their destruction? Well, they do it in a number of different ways, not to mention the fact that they've been love bombing you from the beginning, right? I mean, they start off that way, charming and personable and warm and perfect. And like they were the most amazing human that ever came along and made you feel like you were the most amazing human on the planet in the beginning, didn't they? But beyond that, one of the things that they do is they use this method, this whole divide and conquer. And one of the reasons why they do that is they don't want people to be aligned. This is why they make sure to line up the flying monkeys. They don't like it when people are friends with each other. That's why they have this whole triangulation thing going on. And I noticed this in, even within our own family. They don't like everybody to be all together, not within my side of the family, but, in other parts of our family, I noticed this because they don't want people to be aligned. They don't like it, which is why they do that. They like people to be divided. You see this with dictators. In history, you've seen this with people who've been cult leaders. They don't want that. They use this whole divide and conquer method. These are tactics that they use. They want you to be conflicted between other people and you, this isolation method. Nobody else likes you. I'm the only one who does. Your family hates you. That's one of the ways that they serve as distractions. And I do have a whole video on narcissist favorite phrases, and you can definitely check that out. That's number one. Number two is they get you to question your decisions. That's another distraction method that they use, so that you start wondering, did I make the right choice? They degrade you. They devalue you. They debase you. Oh, that's a stupid move. Oh, who would do that? Why would you do that? And you start going, well, I don't know. I thought that was a good choice. Meanwhile, they are cutting you down. They're trying to get control over you. That's a method of distracting you from their own path of destruction. It's gaslighting is really what it is. And so I have a whole video on how to spot the hidden signs of gaslighting, which you can definitely check out. And similarly, they also get you to second guess your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, when they're making fun of you. You shouldn't feel that way. Oh, I was only kidding. You're oversensitive, things like that. That's all gaslighting, by the way. It's all gaslighting. Again, it's to distract you from focusing on their destruction because they are trying to take control over you. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you to be destabilized. If you heard it with your ears, if you saw it with your eyes, it happened. I want you to put in the comments right now, just stop. Just stop. So you can just start to remind yourself this needs to be shut down because it does. And this is how you're going to start to pivot this. This is how you're going to start to turn this around and stop this conditioning. You're going to turn it around and you're going to start walking toward so that you can start speaking up so that you can start negotiating with them and communicating with them in a way that is powerful. I have a free masterclass on this, by the way, at icanslay.com. You can sign up for it at icanslay.com. And I want you to do that. 3 must-have secrets to communicating with a narcissist. Just sign up for it at icanslay.com. The next thing that they do is they make you think that your positive attributes are weaknesses. All the things that they loved about you at the beginning, your empathy, your kindness, your compassion, your big heart, all those wonderful things about you, they make you think that those are weaknesses. And by the way, they loved all that about you at the beginning. And now they try to make you think that that is something bad about you and they make fun of you or whatever it is. Don't listen to it. You got to close your ears. Fed up with narcissists walking all over you? Sick of everyone believing their lies while you're paying through the nose in attorney's fees? What if you could hold all the cards for a change? Hey, I'm Rebecca Zung. I'm a top 1% trial attorney, a USA Today bestselling author, and I've spent my entire career helping people slay narcissists in negotiations, most recently through my proven slay method. What if your suffering could become your superpower? Imagine turning all that pain into power, not just for you, but for others too. This is your chance to take back control. You can finally win. Become a high conflict negotiation certified coach. Help others while transforming your own life and do good for the world. This is your chance. Go to RebeccaZung.com/apply and I'll show you how to turn the tables for good starting today. Okay, so covert narcissists are actually the ones that I personally have had to deal with myself. I have had to deal with it in a business situation, and my husband and I have had to deal with one in our family. So we personally know the horrible situation that it is with covert narcissists. I mean, they are the ones that are like stealth, they're under the radar, the ones that kind of seem nice on the surface. Everybody thinks that they're so nice. And the ones that actually are the worst to deal with because it's like death by a thousand cuts. And the ones that when you go to tell people about how they are, people go, well, I don't know. That doesn't seem so bad. Maybe it seems inadvertent. They couldn't have really meant that because they seem so nice, that kind of thing. And I don't know. I talk so much more all about their personality in my video, The Covert Passive Aggressive Narcissist. So you might want to check out my video on that particular topic. But anyway, going back to how they have to distract themselves because they are actually really quite miserable people underneath the surface. So they have to distract themselves from their misery. And how do they do that? Well, they do that in a number of ways. Well, one of the ways that they do that is they find their supply. And they have to constantly find new supply because once people are onto them, then they have to move on. You know, it's like vultures that are picking apart the carcass. You know, once that carcass is all picked over, then they have to move on down the road to find a new carcass to pick over. And by the way, they get bored of that carcass as well. You know, once they see a better source of supply, they want to move on. Extremely opportunistic. In fact, I remember, you know, like once you have seen the light, and you guys probably will understand exactly what I'm talking about when you have seen the light. You start to look back and then you start to go, oh, I remember that conversation taking place. And it all starts to make more sense as you start to see. You go, oh, I remember that. Now I understand what was going on. And I remember this conversation with this person that I had a business situation with. And she was referring to another situation that she had actually another business situation with. And I remember her actually saying, well, you know, I got what I needed out of that situation and it kind of took it as far as I could go. So I don't really need that person anymore. And it was like, now that I understand what that person was about, it makes perfect sense, right? She didn't need that person anymore. She'd kind of gotten what she needed out of it, right? So finding and hanging out with their new supply is one of the things that they do to distract themselves from their misery. Ooh, shiny new object. Let me move on to this next one. So that's number one. Number two is hanging out with their flying monkeys and talking about their targets. They love to do that. So I remember actually that too. I was not the flying monkey, I was the target. And I remember knowing who the flying monkeys were. And, of course, I was the one at the time that this business person had glommed onto as the source of supply. But then they glom onto that source of supply, and then they want to devalue the supply, or they want to show the supply how good they are, or how they can be better than you, or hang out with people that are another source of supply, or whatever it is. And you're supposed to somehow be jealous or somehow wonder what they're up to or something like that. And I remember thinking, am I supposed to be wondering what you're talking about? Am I supposed to be wondering what you're doing? Because I remember thinking, I know that's what you're doing. And I remember thinking, like, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care what conversations you're having, but yet I know that's what you're trying to get me to feel. And I remember thinking, I don't enjoy the game. I don't enjoy the attempt at manipulation. I just want to be out of this situation. But I knew that that was what was happening. I was aware that that was what was happening. And I remember thinking, how did I get here? How did I get sucked into the vortex of this ridiculous game? But I knew that that was what was happening. But hanging out with their flying monkeys and talking about their targets is something that they love to do to try to distract themselves, to escape their misery, for sure. They love that. All right, number three is preening and pretending that they are the person that they are masquerading themselves to be. They love to do that. I remember this so much, especially the two covert narcissists in my life. Both of the two covert narcissists in my life happen to be women. Definitely doesn't have to be women. Certainly a lot of covert narcissists are men. They love to preen, they love to parade and be the person that they want to portray themselves to be. So they love to be in situations where they can put themselves in to be that person. So, what's interesting to me is, if it's not working for them to be in a certain situation, they may say, I'm sick, or, I can't show up, or whatever, they'll cancel on you. But then if there's a situation where they can put themselves in to look good, like rush to the side of somebody who's sick or has cancer or something, so that they can look good, then suddenly they've recovered from whatever it is that they might have had, because they definitely want to put themselves in a situation where they can portray themselves as the person that they want to portray themselves as. And if this is all sounding very familiar, give me a totally in the comments so far. So I know that this is sounding familiar to all of you. So I want you to give me a totally in the comments. All right. So, and then the last one that they do to distract themselves is just desperately holding on to maintain that facade. Desperately holding on. I mean, desperately doing whatever they need to do to keep it going. So what do they need to do to maintain that facade? What have they set up in their life to keep it going? So if it's a work situation, if it's a charity that they're running, if it's something that they're doing at a volunteer situation, something within their family, whatever it is that they've got set up to keep themselves looking good, they've got to keep that going so that they can maintain that picture of who they are. So whatever they need to do, they desperately keep that going, to distract themselves, to escape their misery. And so those are the things that they do, that covert narcissists do, to continue to escape their misery. And when they go to negotiate, by the way, it's all of this on steroids, and they keep going. But once it all starts to break down, then you become public enemy number one, and it all starts becoming so much worse. And when that happens, you need to be on high alert. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's be real. Therapy can feel like a really big investment, but your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Traditional in-person therapy can cost $100 to $250 per session, but with BetterHelp, you can save up to 50% per session on average. You pay a flat weekly fee, which means more peace of mind for less. Therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury. BetterHelp gives you that, all from the comfort from your home. And with over 30,000 therapists to choose from and 5 million people served globally, this is the world's largest online therapy platform, and you can switch therapists at any time. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/negotiate today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/negotiate. All right, let's talk about the secret tactics that narcissists use to control and dominate you. Number one is they become the drama king or queen, right? So, you try to talk to them, you try to have a conversation with them about something, and all of a sudden they use these emotional appeals to disguise their false feign. Oh my gosh, how dare you question me? What? You cannot be talking to me. It's the emotional thing. They're trying to prey on your emotions. All of a sudden, you are the victim. You are the one. Or they might use fear, by the way. This is, what are you doing? And a lot of times they know that you're afraid of them too. Or they use your loyalty. They use that loyalty to their advantage. They know how loyal you are to them. They never even think about using something like regular logic or regular reasoning. And part of the reason why is because, there is that part in their brain that doesn't work like regular people's brains. During their formation as children, they were subjected to a lot of trauma. When we are subjected to trauma, we are in fight or flight mode. And when we go into fight or flight mode, our brains become saturated with chemicals, cortisol, epinephrine, all of those kinds of things, and adrenaline, that sort of thing. And when our brains are subjected to that over and over and over again, it can actually cause damage to our brains long term. When that limbic system part of the brain becomes activated as adults, then that's what takes over. And that's what happens with narcissists. They are presented with stimuli in adulthood where they feel like they are being attacked. And then that narcissistic rage, so it's called narcissistic injury. And then when that narcissistic injury becomes triggered, that narcissistic rage comes flying out, and they think that they are being attacked in some way. It could be just the slightest little slight. They heard a tone, they saw a look, they felt something. And, so they don't process things in the same way that we process things. Just remember that when you're dealing with a narcissist. All right. So the second thing is this everybody, nobody. Remember, they see things in black and white. Narcissists don't see things in grays. You're either for me or you're against me, or everybody or nobody. Everything is all one way, one thing. And remember, when that narcissist brain takes over, then that's how they think, right? But one of the things that they do is they like to make you think that, especially during the discard phase, that everybody's lining up against them and nobody's going to be on your side. And so that they've got this whole army of people on their side and no one's going to be on your side. And so they start making you feel that way right from the beginning. And so, right from the beginning of that discard phase, they will say things like that to you. So they're called those flying monkeys, and they want you to feel like that's what's happening. All right. So that's the next one. The next one is, what I call the judge and jury. This is where they will start to say things like, prove it, or they'll say, I'm recording this conversation, or I'm videotaping you. I'm going to have to videotape you because I can't trust you, or are you recording this conversation? They want to prove things all the time. They need to prove things, or they want you to prove things, or they'll say that they'll assert that a point is proven innocent until proven guilty, and they love to take credit for things, and I'm right unless you can prove me wrong, that sort of thing. But they don't act the same way with you. You're not trustworthy, of course. They constantly are attacking you, saying that you're not trustworthy and all that sort of thing. I mean, constantly. And if you've seen any of this, give me an amen in the comments, by the way. And I'd love to see the other kinds of things that you guys have seen also. Just throw them in the comments. Let me know. The next one is what I call labeling. And they love to label people, and they love to judge. They love to judge, everybody on TV is something. They judge people as they're walking down the street. They judge all the neighbors. Everybody's worse than them. They've got something to say about everybody. That person's ugly, or that person's fat, or this person's a loser, or that person doesn't have any abilities on anything, or this person's a terrible cook. I mean, they just don't like anyone. They really just don't like anyone. And they love to invalidate people because it makes them feel better about themselves, and they just don't feel good about themselves anyway. They hate themselves inside. So as you'll just notice that they're super judgy, so that's another way that narcissists control and dominate you and control and dominate other people. And they'll be talking about you, and they'll be talking about other people as well. If you're a renter, this is a no-brainer. You earn points on groceries and travel, so why not on rent? With Bilt, paying rent finally pays off. There's no cost to join, and just by paying rent, you unlock flexible points that can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, and your next Lyft ride, and more. When you pay rent through Bilt, you unlock two powerful benefits. First, you earn one of the industry's most valuable points on rent every month, no matter where you live or who your landlord is. Your rent now works for you. Second, you gain access to your exclusive neighborhood benefits in your city. These include extra points on dining out, complimentary post-workout shakes, and unique experiences only Bilt members can access. And when you're ready to travel, Bilt points can be converted to miles and hotel points. Your rent can literally take you places. Start paying rent through Bilt and take advantage of your neighborhood benefits by going to joinbilt.com/negotiate. That's joinbilt.com/negotiate. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. That's joinbilt.com/negotiate. How we can spot the super sneaky manipulative tactics of highly toxic people, and how they hijack your mind without you even knowing it. Insidious tactics that they use, right, to hijack your mind. One of the things that they do, really the main thing I want to talk about, is pattern interruption, and many different forms of pattern interruption. And the problem with pattern interruption is that you never get to think. You never get to think straight. And what is pattern interruption exactly? And what it is it disrupts your established pattern of thinking. You start to think, you start to have a thought process, and you want to be able to get your thoughts going, and they don't let you. It's almost like a mental speed bump. You're going, you're moving, and then they stop you. And there are many different ways that they stop you. Obviously, just interrupting you in general, interrupting your talking, and they go, no, that's not it. So, of course, that's a way of interrupting you. And it's almost like behavioral traffic, just stopping you and making you stop, right? Of course, that makes you stop. But when you're dealing with toxic personalities, pattern interruption can be used in a number of different ways, creating something that we call cognitive dissonance. And it throws you off track. And it's about taking control of the conversation. It's about setting boundaries. It's about taking control of your mind and throwing you off balance. And when this happens to you over and over and over again, it actually is a form of gaslighting. And it's basically being told, your feelings aren't valid, your perceptions aren't valid, and your viewpoint isn't valid. And it's really an overall attack on you. It can happen over and over and over again, so that you lose your footing, you lose your ground, and it can happen in a number of different ways. And what I want to explain to you about this over time is cognitive dissonance is something that can actually over time be a phenomenon. And I want to explain what that is. It can make you feel utterly confused over time, so that you no longer even trust your own mind after a while. You actually feel like your own mind is distorted after a while, so that you now are starting to trust that other person's mind more than your own. And you start to not even trust your own senses after a while, and perceive that maybe you are correct. I don't know. And it's utterly traumatic. So that when you are going to negotiate, and you go stand or sit at the negotiation table, you are not sitting at a table where you feel equal to the other person. So very few people understand the impact that narcissists have on the people around them. The majority of people see two people sitting at a table, and they don't understand that the person who's sitting across from that other person really may not be mentally strong. The other problem with it is that the other psychological trauma that can be caused is something that we call CPTSD, which is something I think is even potentially worse than PTSD. PTSD is something that happens as a result of one incident, such as war or an accident or something like that. CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something that happens over time as a result of repeated trauma. And it could be, years that this has happened with a person, especially if you've been in a longer term relationship with a highly toxic person, even if it's a professional relationship, by the way. So people who have CPTSD can experience difficulty with sleep, flashbacks, problems with emotional regulation, impairment in alertness, and have difficulty even performing regular daily tasks if you're re-experiencing issues with that trauma. You can have sometimes problems with migraines, feeling hopeless. It can definitely impact your mental acuity as well. There are definitely issues with problems with this constant issues with this pattern interruption. Now, let me talk about the way that pattern interruption can take place. Pattern interruption can take place in a number of different ways. So you're starting to have your thought, you're starting to talk, and the person will come along and they'll say, why are you bringing that up now? And you're like, well, when would be a good time to bring that up? You're starting to have another thought and they'll say, you just literally interrupted me. They'll accuse you of doing the interrupting. And you're like, I didn't interrupt you. And then you start to have the thought again, and they'll say, now you're raising your voice. I didn't raise my voice. And again, you try to have the conversation, and they're off topic. You never get to have a word in. They're constantly trying to figure out ways you don't get to have your thought. By the way, another way that they'll have pattern interruption is by saying something good. Sometimes you see narcissists, and I've seen this in a professional setting too, where I've, as an attorney, been trying to make a point to another attorney, and they'll just interrupt me and say, you look really nice today, by the way. Just to throw me off my game, or just be a jerk, just to interrupt what I'm saying. It looks like on the surface they're giving me a compliment, but what they're doing is trying to throw me off my game, trying to make a point that they're not really listening, disrupting my thought. And that's what they do, trying to get you to lose your footing, trying to get you to be confused, interrupt what you're saying, invalidate your feelings. And it's not okay. So, and if you agree with me, put not okay in the comments. And by the way, if you are negotiating with a narcissist or somebody narcissistic, make sure you grab my free Crush My Negotiation Prep worksheet at winmynegotiation.com. It's a free 15-page ebook, winmynegotiation.com. And if you need additional support, go to my free Facebook group at Narcissist Negotiators with Rebecca Zung. And I do have a sponsor on this channel, which is BetterHelp, which you can go to betterhelp.com/Rebecca Zung to get that help. It is a sponsor on this channel, which means we receive commissions. We have vetted them. It only recommends services that we trust, doesn't cost you any extra, right? But remember that pattern interruption is effective because it helps them gain control and shift that dynamic, and it disrupts your thinking. It helps that toxic person allow them to gain control. Then they can interject their narrative, and it forces you to be off your game. And then they come in and say whatever it is that they want to say. It shifts their paradigm and puts you in a position of defense. So remember, the key is to stand firm, stay in your game, stay in your power, and say, listen, we don't have to have this conversation. If you're going to continue to interrupt me, then we can wait until you're ready to have a conversation where you're not going to interrupt me. Stay firm, set your boundaries. You can just say, we can talk later when you're ready to have a conversation with me, when you're not going to interrupt me, that sort of thing. And I have another video on where narcissists are trying to desperately regain control. It's called 5 Telltale Signs of a Narcissist's Desperate Last Bid to Regain Control, which you can definitely check that out. I highly recommend that you do. But if you're dealing with a toxic personality, learning these tools are incredibly empowering. Regain your boundaries, stand firm, and make sure that you do. And I definitely recommend that you get my book, slaythebully.com, join my launch team, because I delve into all of that there. So make sure that you do that too. Remember, that today is a great day to start negotiating your best life. Let's talk about narcissists. How do you spot them? I mean, there's so many different kinds. I'm telling you, I didn't know myself. I only dealt with a covert, passive aggressive narcissist after I had built this massive, huge law practice, this successful law practice. And then I went into an entrepreneurial endeavor with somebody who turned out to be a covert, passive aggressive narcissist who was a female. I didn't even know that women could be narcissists. It was a business partnership for me. So there's a spectrum of narcissism, and all the way at the end of the spectrum is narcissistic personality disorder. But it's a person who feels totally and completely empty inside. It's a person who feels like they need to get all of their feeling of value from external sources. So inside, they've got this black hole inside of them, and they're constantly trying to fill it from external validation. That's what's really going on, because they got this shame, this deep sense of shame. And so this external validation is what we call narcissistic supply. It can be what we call, what I call diamond level supply, which is how they look to the world. And it's like their image, and it can be prestigious friends, and it could be cars, and it could be money, it could be big houses, it could be all that sort of thing. Or it could be what I call coal level supply, which is pushing people down to make themselves feel better. So that could be degrading people, controlling people, making people feel, small, so that they feel bigger, passive aggression, that sort of thing too. So malignant narcissists are, a person who has more of an overlay of, antisocial personality disorder, that sort of thing. But a covert narcissist, is different from an overt narcissist in the sense that, an overt narcissist is that what I call the garden variety narcissist. That's the person who, kind of fills the room, demands the best table, is that impulsive person, that person who is the one that everybody thinks of when you think of a narcissist, sort of bragging about everything, demanding, the out there one who's sort of in your face, interrupting you, and right in your face. Whereas the covert narcissist is not the aggressive one. That's the one who doesn't necessarily have that overinflated, in your face sort of personality. The covert narcissist, on the other hand, is more passive aggressive. They're more of a victim nature. They're going to be more of the, oh, it's not fair. And, or they might appear very, very nice. They might appear very, very kind. Everybody thinks that they're wonderful. And they're more going to be, the inadvertent, leaving you off the email chain. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Oh, I don't know how that happened. I can't believe I forgot that. They might smear you, but they put it in terms of care. Oh, I'm so worried about somebody. I'm so worried about Susie and her drinking. I'm just concerned for her, that sort of thing. But it's more that underlying security, that underlying rage, that jealousy is just right underneath that surface. They are much more likely to seem like a victim, seem like a person who everybody wants to take care of. Oh, poor person, oh, poor Anne. Or they might be the first person that shows up at the hospital when somebody has cancer. They make it look like they're a good person. But just underneath that surface is that underlying thing. And everybody else thinks they're wonderful. So if you're their target, if you are their victim, then it makes it all that much harder to get people to understand what's going on, because it's sort of death by a thousand cuts. And people might say, oh, but they're so nice. It was probably inadvertent. and you're it and the things that they do have an element of plausible deniability about them, because they act like, oh, I must have forgotten that, or I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to leave you off of that email chain. I don't know why you didn't show up for that meeting, that sort of thing. So it's a much more difficult situation, whereas the grandiose narcissist is much more in your face, and when you're dealing with them in court, they're going to be the ones who are more likely to ignore court orders, file false pleadings, that sort of thing. So if you're dealing with them at all, it's all very, very difficult. You're definitely going to want some support, and you're going to want to have people around you. So join my free private Facebook group, Narcissist Negotiators. If you are needing some phrases, something at the ready to help you, make sure you grab those at disarmthenarc.com, and so that you have some handy phrases to help you when you're writing emails, when you're writing your text messages, you're standing there talking to them, you're like, oh my God, what do I say? Disarmthenarc.com is a good place for you to start. I know that you probably have seen some of these things, and if you have seen them, give me a totally in the comments, and let me know if you've seen them. If you need access to therapy, betterhelp.com/Rebecca Zung is a good place to start with that as well. It's a sponsor that we have here on this channel. We receive commissions on that. It doesn't cost you any extra. It's just some additional resource for you, so that you can have access to some resources that have been vetted. It's not you. It's their need for control, their need for to fill that void that's inside of them. That's why they call them energy vampires. That's why they go through all of these charades to make themselves feel better, because they have this deep-seated shame that's inside of them, and they're trying to cover up their manipulations. It's a result of trauma from their childhood, which is actually something that I talk about in my book, Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win, which you can check out at slaythebully.com. I really do invite you to make sure that you are continuing your education, continuing your journey in getting the information that you need, because the power of knowledge against narcissism, the power of understanding will help to protect you, put that invisible shield down around you. I would say step 1, don't run. Step 2, make a U-turn. Step 3, break free. That's kind of the first part of my slay method, that first part of the strategy when you're creating that vision and that action plan, because knowing that you have a framework to deal with them helps you so much when you're just starting to make those first baby steps, right? So if you like this video, give it a like, give it a share. Make sure other people have access to this information too. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do that now. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you'll get notified when I upload brand new videos, which is every single day. I enjoy making sure that you have access to information. And, we're creating a slay nation over here. We're creating a community so that you feel empowered, so that you know that you're not alone, because narcissists want you to feel alone. And I don't want you to feel that way. No one here wants you to feel that way. And so the next video that I want you to watch is 8 comments that reveal a narcissist dishonesty. There's so many comments that they have that reveal a narcissist dishonesty, but I want you to watch that video next, 8 comments that reveal a narcissist dishonesty. And remember that we're in this together. No matter where you are in your journey, that is a great jumping off point. All right. So You can do this. You can become the most powerful version of yourself. I've literally helped thousands of people do it. You can do it too. I want to just briefly talk about your 5Ds because I think that these are so good.
Yeah. Yep. So it's the 5Ds in a relationship, but it's not, these 5Ds can apply to any relationship.
Yeah.
It can apply to a work relationship.
Yeah.
And the first one is distort.
So these are the 5Ds that are negative forces in a relationship.
Yep. So distort. That D, what does it do? It tells lies. It plants negative thoughts in you, right? It makes you think negative things. So the thing that I always say, and so let's apply it to your relationship. You could think, oh, you know, he doesn't love me anymore. He doesn't think I'm pretty. Well, that's distortion, right? Those are lies. It's the lies that you're just listening to negative lies. And so speak truth to the lies, right? The minute you start hearing those kind of things coming in, speak truth. Just, you know, I literally, the minute I do that, sometimes I even verbally go, stop. And I'll say something positive to myself, or I'll think a positive thought. Does that make sense? So you've got to.
We are meaning making machines, right?
Yeah.
We make things mean things that don't mean that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, so yeah, that's a big one. So distortion in a relationship, in any relationship, is not good. And the next one is discourage. Okay. So your distortions can turn into discouragement. Oh, I'm not good enough for him. Like, you know, so you start to play this thing in your mind. I'm not worthy. So no, then you need to turn it around, encourage yourself, you know, again, encourage your partner. So it may be that it's your partner. Like I said, he wanted to come in. I wanted to cut him down and discourage him, but instead I encouraged him. So you've got to turn that one around. So first D's distort, second D's discourage, and the third one is doubt, right? So lies and discouragement lead to doubt yourself, to doubt God's plan for you, you know, to doubt your direction, to doubt the love that your partner might have for you. So the way to counter doubt is through trust. So when John had shared with me that he, had done this infidelity, at that point, I can continue to doubt. The minute he was going out, I could have doubted him. But for me, I knew that I had to trust. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying trust without something to back it up. They need to give you something to trust, right? But just make sure it's not things you're kind of just, coming up with in your own head. And the fourth D is distract. And this is such a big one because think about it. If you are busy or your partner's busy, say you're busy doing all the things that you need to do to take care of your household or take care of the kids or make money, and you're feeling, kind of unappreciated. And all of a sudden, somebody kind of comes into your life that tells you how wonderful you are, how, it's a distraction. Or, a lot of times for men, and women, it can be pornography. It can be pornography, something that distracts you and just seems shiny and bright, and distraction from your relationship. You need to be careful of that because, that there's that whole saying, if the devil doesn't make you busy, and you're right. If the devil doesn't make you bad, he'll make you busy. So it's a distraction. Mm-hmm. And then the fifth one is divide. And that divide, if it's in a relationship or in a marriage, I should say, the divide means divorce. And so you have to guard yourself against those 5 Ds. And so it's about counteracting each one of them. And the divide, again, if you two are connected as a couple, you can really negate a lot of that. It's when you're not united. Again, it's when you're doing the I and not the we. So those are the 5 Ds.
Right. And again, we stress, obviously, if you are in an abusive relationship, if you are in a situation where your partner is a narcissist,
right,
and not willing to change, and being verbally or emotionally abusive to you, then clearly and not willing to be a we.
Right. And in that case, then you need to walk away from the relationship. And I'm not one to say, leave the relationship, but there are deal breakers. And exactly what you just named, those are deal breakers. If they're not willing to change, if they're not willing to look at themselves, if they're not willing to be honest, right? That's huge. Here's an example. And it can be, you come up with your own guidelines, but say your partner has cheated on you or has shown that they've been distracted. Maybe for building trust, you can look at their phone. Now, some people might think that's a violation, but you know what? If that's something that you two negotiate and say, you know what, it just would make me feel better until I can trust you. One of the things that John did do, I got to tell you, I persecuted him, and rightly so. I mean, I was so hurt and I felt very, very deceived, right? So when John really, he was working towards being in the relationship and being a good partner, I was allowed to look at his phone whenever I wanted to, and I, hand it over. And now some people might feel like, oh, well, that's that in itself. For me, it was very important. It was very important for me to look and see what was going on because I needed to build that trust. So, your partner has to be willing to do, and, you have to negotiate those together.
Yeah.
Depending on what they are.
And so what does that mean for you? And one of the things that I like is that you have this list of things like what is, a perfect partner for you. And I think that that's an important thing for people. Okay, if they're not going to stay in this relationship, what does that look like going forward? And in some ways it's sort of a manifestation exercise.
Yeah. I always say I did my best relationship work when I was not in a relationship. So, I mean, I dated some real winners before I met John. And wow, I dated an incredible narcissist. He was a piece of work, but I mean, he brought me to my knees. I mean, there was a lot of pain and a lot of crying, but I was able to work on myself a lot. And I think that's why when John started exhibiting these behaviors, I didn't cave and I didn't fold and I didn't go down, because I saw it for what it was. And I had done enough work on myself where I'm like, hey, that's not okay. This behavior is not okay. And I'm having to teach my daughter that. She actually got into a relationship with a narcissist. And I watched as he started to look better and do better. The more she kept feeding into him, this guy ended up it was amazing to see the transformation in him. And it was sickening to see the transformation in my daughter. She absolutely did not look like herself. She didn't act like herself. It was a really sad thing. It was almost like he sucked the lifeblood out of her
Oh
So
yeah, I saw it in my daughter as well.
yeah.
I
So
mean, it
you
was
have to
awful.
be, careful of that. So you should always be working on yourself. And yeah, I listen, make a list of what's important to you in a relationship and pay attention. Some of this is really basic, right? But we forget because we get so taken back by maybe the good looks or the charisma. It's the same thing that I tell my kids, when they were going to school. I used to say, if you are in a group of people or you're with somebody and you walk away and you don't feel good, they're not your people. They're not your people. So you always have to pay attention to that. Yeah. So it's very important to do the work on yourself when you're not in a relationship.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to say is stop trying to make not your people your people.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and so you have the 4 C's, which I love for, if you don't have it in your current relationship, then, I think it's totally a deal breaker. And, this is something that you definitely want in your next relationship. So talk about that. And I think that that's like a good way for us to wrap up.
Okay. So the first of the 4 C's is communicate. I said it. I've said it a couple times in this interview. I'm going to say it again. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Where there's a void in negativity, where there's a void in communication, negativity will fill it. So I always like to encourage couples to find a time that works for you. So I knew with my husband, right when he was walking in the door, was not a good time to try to communicate with him. So find your sweet spot. And I've had to find that with my kids. What's the best time to talk to them where they really open up to me? So communicate. One of the things you can do as a couple, ask your spouse or ask your partner on a scale of 1 to 10, how do I communicate? And what would make it a 10? Right? That's an easy one. So the next C is connect. And you have to communicate to connect. And again, that sounds like an obvious one, but think about it. When you get really busy with work and with kids and, maybe starting a new business, whatever it is, you don't take as much time to connect. So try to find a time that works for you all to connect. Now, one of the things that I did with my husband is we would take a walk. And I got to tell you, sometimes these walks, we would fight. But by the end of the walk, we ended up working out a lot. So sometimes it's just about that movement and the talking that we were able to talk a lot. And one of the things that I highly recommend that people do with their family is a family meeting. Once a week, we would get together with our children and sit around the table. And I'm going to tell you something. It was not easy. There were times we'd go family, or John would say family meeting, or maybe I would start it depending. And, the eyes would roll and everybody had to put their phones down. But Rebecca, I'm going to tell you something. It was fascinating to me. John or I would bring something to the table to read. A lot of times it might be maybe scripture or an article that somebody had written. And it never failed that something one of us was going through, we wouldn't know the kids were experiencing. This article would just open up the channels for us to have a conversation. And it made our family dynamic and our connection with each other so strong. We became such a stronger family. The only regret that I have about family meetings is I didn't start soon enough. So even if it's just you and your spouse or your mate, do it. So that's communicate, connect, and the next one is commit. Commit to your relationship. Commit to work on it. Commit to, and it could be little things. So, there's been a study that the strongest relationships are when each of the partners take time to listen to their spouse or help them with something. And I'm talking little things. So John might be writing an article and he might call me into his office and say, hey, can you just read this real quick? And I'm going to tell you something. Last thing I want to do is sit down at that moment and read through his article. but I know it's important to him. And so I'll take that 5 minutes to sit and read the article and give my input. So it's committing to the relationship. It might mean going to a company party with your spouse when you really have no desire to hang out with the work, the work people. So commit to your relationship. And then the last one is care. Show you care. Isn't it funny how a lot of times in relationship, our spouse is like the last one we give the love to, and we kind of talked about that in the 5Ds too. But showing that you care about them, that you care about the relationship. So, and that's the whole we. It's we, not me. So those are the 4 C's: communicate, connect, commit, and care. And those apply to not just intimate relationships. Again, can apply to work relationships, any of that.
Friendships.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.